Madam, you enable me to, oh, you will present and later you will enable me, is it? Madam, you are not enabled me to share the slide.
Yeah, few minutes after
Yeah,
I
okay.
present your CV.
So you will use and then you will let me share.
Good afternoon, friends.
Start, then issue.
Yeah. Good afternoon, friends. We are back. This is a Friday evening, and we are back with one more episode of our Forefront of Future Frontiers, the medical webinar series. We are now in series 10, and series 10 has a theme of how we can put patients first. What are the issues with regard to quality and safety in patient care? So that is the theme for series 10, and we are in episode number 55 today. That is, we've been running for more than a year. That's what you would have noticed from our recent 50th episode also. So today we have with us Dr. Shivashanmugam. He is going to explore how point of care ultrasound is going to enable us to deliver safe care at patients' bedside. So that is the topic for today, point of care ultrasound in anesthesiology. I welcome you all for this episode of this FFF. And this program is being hosted by the Scientific Society of Arupadayavidu Medical College, which is a constituent college of Vinayaka Missions Research Foundation. Welcome to FFF. I'd request our Dean, Dr. Priyaf Kotu, to say a few words and welcome the speaker.
Very good afternoon to Dr. Shiva and Dr. Ravi Shankar and my colleagues, Dr. Bhatt, Dr. Mahalakshmi, and all the esteemed participants for this 55th episode of this FFF webinar, which has earned quite a lot of credibility. And in fact, we've been having a couple of anesthetists in this all 55. If I remember correctly, a couple of anesthetists, there's Bala Venkat shared, then Muralidhar Joshi had shared, Dr. Jivatia had shared this platform, if I remember correctly. Now, on behalf of the management, on behalf of the university, I am honored to invite our resource person, who is talking on this point of care ultrasound usage in anesthesiology. And myself being an anesthetist, I also must share one or two thoughts, a first-hand experience of this ultrasound when it was getting introduced into the specialty of anesthesiology. Until I appeared for my examination, there was no ultrasound for the, even though the Winnie had described the interscalene block using paresthesia. I remember yearbook of anesthesia of 1978 had a comparison of eliciting paresthesia and locating the brachial plexus nerves and using ultrasound. That was the first, I think, published report. Because there used to be one special fourth paper on recent advances in anesthesia. We used to see that time there was no internet, nothing. We used to see those yearbooks and just try to have some superficial knowledge of those. That was how. And subsequently, when the second encounter was when I was deeply involved in cardiac anesthesia, and we used to day in, day out, we used to put these internal jugular cannulations or femoral or in the antecoaxial fossa. That time, some published came in where the usage of the ultrasound for locating the internal jugular. And our first time response was, why do you need an ultrasound? You know, we used to do it so aram say with no complication whatsoever. Once in a while, we used to hit this vessel artery, and it used to give a small bulb-like thing. We used to compress it for some time and get away with it. So that was the initial this one. After that, there is no looking back. You know, the ultrasound, by virtue of being a non-invasive technique, safe technique, and relatively cheaper compared to other modes, there is no exponential growth in the usage of the ultrasound for anything and everything under the ambit of anesthesia and critical care. There is one broad comment I can make. Now for anything and everything, somebody wants to treat even the post-pleural puncture headache with using ultrasound. You know, a senior anesthetist like me will say, "What nonsense is this?" You know, those kind of things are there. We should have a broad mind to accept all these advances, then only the science can grow. And I very well recognize the presence of Dr. Ravi Shankar over here, even though he likes to be silent, who pioneered the ultrasound usage. It's been over here for anesthesia fraternity. He even started ultrasound guided course, very popular, very authentic, very valid course. We are really honored to have your presence here. Of course, Shiva is your creation, I think, and then he'll also be very much privileged to have your presence in this audience. And certainly you will be certainly making, or I expect making some comments, some value addition to what Dr. Shiva will be telling. I don't want you to be silent at all. So with these few words, I welcome you, Dr. Shiva, once again for this AVMC FFF platform. Thank you very much.
You're not audible.
Mahalakshmi is muted.
Ma'am, you're not audible.
Mahalakshmi, you're not audible.
Now, sir?
Yeah, now it's better. Yeah. Now you can.
Yeah, let me take this opportunity to introduce Dr. Shiva Shanmugam. He was actually my contemporary in JIPMER. It was 1 year, I think, junior to me. He did MD anesthesia. I remember distinctly when I was senior resident in pediatric surgery. He used to have his elective postings there. So from that time, we have been working together almost. Currently, he is working as the professor in HOD Department of Anesthesia, MGMCRI. Yeah, after finishing his MD anesthesia, he worked for some time, and then he went to Chitra Tirunal Institute in Trivandrum to do this postdoctoral certificate course in cardiothoracic, vascular, and neuroanesthesia. Subsequent to that, we saw him in MGMCRI. He joined as one of the faculty in the Department of Anesthesia, and from that time, I think his growth has been quite significant and phenomenal. He was awarded the FRCP by the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons of Glasgow in 2012. And more importantly, as Dr. Kotur was mentioning, he has been one of the persons whose input is very crucial for this FUGURA course, that is Fellowship in Ultrasound Guided Regional Anesthesia. I remember Dr. Shiva Shanmugam went for this Cambridge Fellowship in Ultrasound Guided Anesthesia in UK. He trained with Dr. Abraham Malik.
Yeah, Abraham Malik. Yeah.
Abraham Malik.
Yes.
So, and then he came back and then he started doing this. And for quite some time, he had done a lot of things in MGMCRI. He's been resource person for workshops on regional anesthesia, in ultrasound guided anesthesia, in 4 international conferences. You see, he's been a very popular and active speaker. He has been speaking in many of the state level, national level CMEs and conferences. So that is 24. VFFF is going to be 25 number, I think. And he has organized 5 CMEs and workshop. I distinctly remember the International Regional Anesthesia Conference, Asia Pacific one he organized in, I think, 2012 or so. Yeah, and he has many awards and recognitions to his credit. He is one of the members of the Academy of Regional Anesthesia, which has put up a board of studies for regional anesthesia programs. He is also an editorial board member for International Journal on Regional Anesthesia. He is an executive committee for the Academy of Regional Anesthesia. And when he went for this UK fellowship, right, he completed his training in the Leeds University on ultrasound. I think that was the initial thing. And I'm not very sure because I remember the Sonocyte machine, which Ravi sir used to show us, one compact machine. Even in war zone, you can do ultrasound and all that. That is, I think, was the starting point for this entire thing. And so he has also been awarded the Best Postgraduate Award in MD Anesthesia in 2005. and he's got about 20 international publications to his credit, and he has many research projects going on. So this is in a nutshell about what Dr. Shivashanmugam has been and he is doing. I'd request him to take the stage and tell us a little bit more in detail about point of care ultrasound in anesthesiology. And before we proceed, I'd like to remind the audience that this program is being recorded. This is for posterior academic use. And I would request all of you to put your mics on mute mode, except the speaker, obviously, so that the audio quality is good for everyone concerned. Over to you, Dr. Shiva. The stage is yours. You can.
Thank you very much, madam. Enable me sharing.
I have pressed on. You must be able to share now.
Yeah. Can you see my screen?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much, madam, for your kind introduction. As it is introduced well, today I'm going to see how the point of care ultrasound has transformed the practice of anesthesiology. We all know that what is ultrasound, but what is this point of care ultrasound? Traditionally, if you wanted to diagnose anything in the patient, the ultrasound machine is usually placed in the radiology department. And we will send the patient to the radiology department for any diagnosis to be made. And if there is any intervention required, traditionally we will do in the radiological suite. But in the last 2 decades, the ultrasound machine come out of the radiology department and entered into every clinical area of the patient care service, like casualty, emergency medical services, ward, operating theater complex, and every single OPD. So now instead of patient going to the radiology department, now ultrasound is coming to every patient care area. And then the primary treating physician, he is not the radiologist, but he uses the ultrasound at the bedside to diagnose problems he do in care area itself. So in that way, now ultrasound has entered into the operating theater complex. And as an anesthesiologist, how we adapted this technology to deliver our patient care more effectively and safely is what I'm going to talk today. So I'm going to take you through this presentation as sharing of my personal journey with point of care ultrasound in anesthesiology. This is exactly 1 decade over because we got an ultrasound in about 2009. And so I'm going to share the experience and transformation what we had in the last 10 years from 2011 to 2021. In the anesthesia practice can be extreme and wide. So for an easy understanding, I just categorize the subset practices so that it is very easy to look at the applications. In terms of regional anesthesia, how ultrasound is useful, and then vascular access, acute pain service, rehabilitation, and then crisis management. Actually, the ultrasound application list is very big. For the interest of time, I took these 5 major areas where I got an experience most so that it is benefit to you as well. The disclosure, I'm going to use a lot of images from a particular ultrasound machine. It doesn't mean I'm promoting the company. It is simply there in my department. So I am used to capture all the images. So I'm not having any conflict of interest on that. And I'm not going to discuss any physics, mechanism, or evidence. I'm going to talk about just the application, how the technology is being applied in my specialty to deliver effective patient care. And somebody voice, and then how it has changed the practice in terms of, and then at the department and as an institute, and how these transformations impacted the society as a whole, so that you will get a bigger picture how this transformation has helped all of us. And then I'm going to use a lot of patient images and videos. We took an informed consent from them while we are shooting it. We will tell them that this is going to be utilized for teaching and training purposes because it is a teaching training institute. It is for internal circulation. So I request every viewer not to share any of these images and videos for outside social media. With that request, let me look at the first subset, that is how the ultrasound applied in practicing regional anesthesia. Because a lot of the other non-specialist people are there, I will just explain to you how we do a peripheral nerve block before the era of ultrasound is we are not seeing the nerve through the skin. So we have only the surface landmark, that is muscle and the bony prominences. So here in case of if it is a brachial plexus, we will palpate and mark the sternocleidomastoid muscle. And when we roll over our finger, just lay to it the scalene muscle, anterior and middle scalene. So between these two scalene muscles, only the brachial plexus will come out. So we will mark that groove and introduce our needle, and we will advance our needle till we get a paresthesia. So that paresthesia is only tell us that we are close to the nerve. Once we get the paresthesia, we will stabilize the needle and inject about 30 to 40 ml of local anesthetic volume at that point. And then we will allow the local anesthetic to soak all the brachial plexus nerves so that the block will become effective. So even in some places, because we are not seeing the nerve, we are only touching the nerve at one point and delivering the local anesthetic, we tend to give more volume because we can't afford sparing of any nerves because patients will suffer during the intraoperative period. In some situations, we may use sometimes 40 to 50 ml as well, in fear of we don't want to spare any of the nerves. Because we don't have anything to see at the skin, it is only the muscle, and through paresthesia we are locating it. And later in about 70s and 80s, the nerve stimulator come into picture, where we can stimulate the nerve and deliver the local anesthetic. There also we are not seeing any nerve. The muscle stimulating muscle will become an indicator for us that we are close to the nerve. So now, after the ultrasound comes in, what and all it shows to us. So in this image, if you see, this is 5 nerve roots form the brachial plexus, all of you know that. This is C5, C6, both the things join to form the upper trunk. Then the C7 nerve root continues middle trunk, and T1 comes out and form the inferior trunk close to the subclavian artery. So these are all the 5 nerve roots that form the brachial plexus. So I'm going to show you an ultrasound scan of the brachial plexus. I'm going to scan just above the cricoid cartilage and then scan down above the clavicle to look at how the brachial plexus looks in the ultrasound. What are all the things it can show us? If you look at in this image, this is the skin and subcutaneous tissue. The first muscle is the sternocleidomastoid muscle. And then this is the carotid artery. Whenever the ultrasound hits a bone, it produces a characteristic shadow. The bone looks like a white line with a dense shadow below. So I will just play the video. As I play, I will explain you what I am seeing. So now as I scan down, you can see the first dark round circle that appears. This is a C5 nerve root. And when it appears over a bifid transverse process. If you just see, this is the C5, the next to C6. So it comes out of a bifid C6 transverse process. So that is C5, this is C6 nerve root. And then as I go down, this is a C7 nerve root. So C5, C6, C7 nerve root. If I go little more down, I can see the C8. So you can see C5, C6, C7, C8. And as I move to the supraclavicular area, the last round, that is the T1. So that joins the C8. And then it's close to the subclavian artery. So now at this level, if you see, this is the subclavian artery, this is the first strip, and this is the pleura. In this image, if you see, this is the first strip, the cut section of the first strip, and then all the complexes are close to the subclavian artery. This is what you are seeing here. This is the subclavian artery, this is the first strip, and then all the complexes are situated above and lateral to the subclavian artery. So these amount of information we can see through ultrasound. We can identify every single root, how they join to form the upper trunk, how they will divide into divisions, each and everything you can see in real time. Okay, now we have seen it, how we are going to deposit the drug. So in this is the anterior scalene muscle, that is the middle scalene muscle. This is the C5 nerve root, this is the C6 nerve root, this is C7. This is how we will do the block. So this is the needle which is approaching. You can precisely see and then place your needle between the nerve root or the elements of the brachial plexus and inject 0.1 ml, 0.2 ml, maximum about 2 to 3 ml per trunk. So here both C5 and C6 join to form the upper trunk. We are injecting only 2 to 3 ml of local anesthetic within the trunk. So now even with that 2 to 3 ml, you just see the local anesthetic has come out of the brachial plexus element. This is the amount is required to produce an upper trunk block. Similarly, you can put 3 ml local anesthetic into the upper trunk, middle trunk, and the inferior trunk. So with 10 ml, we could able to produce as an effective brachial plexus block in 10 minutes time. So now this is an image which shows after the injection, you just see this is the upper trunk. And then as we go down, it is dividing into anterior and posterior division. As we scan up, you can see the upper trunk. As we go more proximally, it is separate into C5 and C6 nerve. So this is on the left side. You can see the histological image. This is an anterior scalene muscle. That is the middle scalene muscle. C5 nerve root, C6, and then C7. This is the anterior scalene, middle scalene, C5, C6, C7. This is the first time in history we could able to see what we are doing. How we are using the ultrasound machine, that's a different aspect altogether. But this mere possibility itself is paramount change in the patient safety. So the patient safety depends on how we are going to use the equipment. But the first step in patient safety is we have to see what we are doing. And ultrasound can show us that equivalent to an image which you are seeing through microscope, you can see through the ultrasound. So it has become really a third eye for the anesthesiologist. So is it only now we are, ma'am, am I clear? Is it okay from?
Yeah,
Policy, ma'am?
okay. Yeah, you're fine.
Okay. So this is where we are depositing the local anesthetic. Okay, fine. We have done the block effectively. Will the ultrasound help us to prevent complications? This is the same image that you have seen some time back. The brachial plexus comes out between the anterior and the middle scalene. So this is the nerves that we have to block. But if you look at closely, the nerve which is running on the anterior surface of the anterior scalene muscle is a phrenic nerve. If your local from the brachial plexus, if it seeps into the anterior scalene muscle, it will produce a phrenic nerve palsy. So your hemidiaphragm will get paralyzed and some patients may become breathless if their respiratory system is compromised. And if you come little more medially, this is the carotid sheath, where it is carotid artery, internal jugular vein, and then the vagus nerve between them. Here the arteries has been dissected for you to see the structures behind the carotid sheath. So below the carotid sheath, if the local comes in, this is a sympathetic chain over the longus colli muscle. It will produce a Horner syndrome. And if your local comes little more medially, this is the esophagus, this is the trachea, this is the tracheoesophageal groove, and this is the recurrent laryngeal nerve. When your local anesthetic reaches the recurrent laryngeal nerve, the patient will lose voice or he will become hoarseness of voice. So these are all the complications of brachial plexus which are there for the last 100 years. Now the ultrasound, let us see whether it can show all these critical structures. So in this image, this is an anterior scalene, this is the middle scalene, this is C5, C6 nerve root. And if you look at little closely on the anterior surface of the anterior scalene muscle, this is the phrenic nerve. So if the local from here, if it comes here, it will produce a phrenic nerve palsy. If the local seeps, this is the carotid sheath, internal jugular vein, carotid artery. This hypoechoic circle is a vagus nerve. This hyperechoic structure is the sympathetic chain. If the local from here, if it seeps here, it will produce a Horner syndrome. If the same local comes little more medially, you can see the esophagus here. This is the trachea, this is the esophagus. Below the, I'll just stop the video, just below the thyroid gland. You see the exact image here, the thyroid gland is reflected and you can see the recurrent laryngeal nerve there. If just below the thyroid lobe, you can see the recurrent laryngeal nerve here. This is the esophagus, this is the trachea. If the local reaches here, it produces an Horner syndrome. So during a real time, you can see whether you are depositing the local anesthetic in the right place. Not only that, you are not hitting any other critical structures, so that the patient safety has transformed a lot. The ultrasound not only show us how to do a block, it also shows us what are all the structures you should not hit. It will guide us in that aspect as well. So is it only with the brachial plexus? Not at all. Traditionally, when we do how we can access the brachial plexus is in very predefined places. One is above the clavicle, other one is below the clavicle or at the axilla. Because in these areas only we have a clear landmark, we can palpate and put our needle. But with an ultrasound, I can trace the nerve from the root to the terminal branch. So there is no question of landmark because you are seeing the entire anatomy. The place where you will deposit the local anesthetic is mere a choice of surgical requirement and the patient condition. So it has become so versatile that I can target the nerve anywhere you want, and any branches you tell I will block. So in this image, the ultrasound fellow is scanning a median nerve from the mid-humerus level to the wrist. So this is the brachial artery, and this honeycomb structure is the median nerve. I'll just stop the video. This is the brachial artery. The median nerve always accompanies the brachial artery. So he is just scanning the hand. So he's now come to the elbow. At the elbow level, the median nerve will dive deep into the flexor muscles of the forearm. So here is the nerve. As we cross the elbow, it will just drop. So it drops, and then it will be situated between the flexor compartment muscle. So when you see the nerve like this from the root to the terminal end, the choice of blocking is dictated by the surgical requirement and the patient condition. So now, is it only the brachial plexus because it is superficial? Can we see through ultrasound? No. You look at, this is the sciatic nerve block from the mid-thigh level. So this is the sciatic nerve. Sciatic nerve is a combination of two nerves. This is the tibial and that is the common peroneal. And we can precisely advance the needle. We are now not only seeing the nerve, even the connective tissues around the nerve we are looking at a lot. So we are rewriting the anatomy itself. These connective tissue layers are not known before. Now with the real-time ultrasound, we could able to see different connective tissues and their implications. So even if you see one more layer that is getting opened up, that is an epineurium of the sciatic nerve. So now this is about the sciatic nerve. Then you can ask me, is it ultrasound only enable us to do the peripheral nerve block? Can it guide the spinal and epidural? Yes, very well. Even now, if you look at, this is a caudal anesthesia in children. Mahalakshmi madam will know that she will be looking at an OT every now and then. Here we will access the epidural space through the sacral bone. There is an opening in the sacral bone, tail end of the sacral bone known as the sacral hiatus. So traditionally how we will do is we will palpate the bony landmarks and introduce the needle. When you come here, you will pierce the sacrococcygeal membrane and then reduce the needle angle, introduce your needle angle into the epidural space. And the thecal sacs end somewhere at a level of L1, and then you will inject the drug into the epidural space. If you go into the thecal sac, you will inject into the intrathecal space that will become a total spine. So during our practice, when we do a landmark guided technique, the only thing what we have is through the skin, we will feel the bone. After that, you will put the needle. After that, when we are injecting, we have to only imagine that it is going into the epidural space, and this is how it will spread, because nothing else we can see or feel. So after the needle, the loss of resistance of the sacrococcygeal membrane, everything is blind, and you have to imagine and visualize. Let us see now what the ultrasound shows us. So if you just place the probe and then do the caudal injection. So that is, the needle is advancing. So I will just stop here and then show you. This is the sacral bone, and the topmost white line is the sacrococcygeal membrane. This is the skin subcutaneous tissue. This is the paraspinal muscle, and this is the sacrococcygeal membrane, and this is the sacral bone, and these white band is the phylum terminale. And then the space above is the epidural space, and this is the 25 gauge hypodermic needle which is approaching the caudal space. So we are piercing the sacrococcygeal membrane and then injecting the local anesthetic. So you can see the local anesthetic just open up the epidural space and then spread proximally. And then if you come proximally, this is at a level of L1, you can see where the thecal sac ends and where the local goes. And there is a big gap between your needle and the thecal sac. So there is no question of you're injecting into the thecal sac if you precisely look at your needle. So it is not only that, you just see how the drug spreads into the epidural space. As we inject more, it is split opening up. That is the dura which is getting flushed to the epidural, flushed to the spinal cord. In a transverse axis, when you inject the local, you can see slowly the local is descending the epidural space. This is the spinal cord which is pulsating, and then the dura mater is just pushed down and it is snugly fitting into the spinal cord, and this is the local anesthetic on top of the dura. So whether, I mean, if you look at, I mean, these images, and we can see how far the drug has spread. So whether it has reached the desired level or not. So all those things we can able to see. Here the spinal cord with the dura mater tightly snugged, and then the epidural space is fully filled with the local anesthetic to the desired level. So these spinal and epidural is being practiced for about 100 to 120 years. So now the first time in history, we could able to see these things, because otherwise it's only an cadaveric anatomy and atlases through which only we can read and imagine while you are doing. But this mere possibility itself is such a privilege. And as a generation, I think we are blessed very much. So when you see things like this, the safety is definitely changed a lot. So that is about a normal anatomy. That is normal anatomy. You will either without an ultrasound, you can mark the surface landmarks and right place. Suppose if the anatomy is altered because of the disease process, then the landmark also is not there. Can you able to do a regional anesthesia safely in those patients? That is where the technology is going to help us a lot. So let us look at in this patient. She is a 40-year-old lady weighing around 40 kg. Height is about 130 centimeters. She has got a gross scoliosis because of a polio paralysis. Below the T10, her power is 0. She can only crawl. She has got a big fibroid uterus, and she's posted for total abdominal hysterectomy. Where you look at her spine, it is not just the lateral curvature. The spine itself is rotated to 90 degrees towards the left. So your interlaminar phase is not facing you, it is facing to the right side. So in this case, if you can use an ultrasound and do a purely objective combined spinal epidural, then we reached a benchmark in regional anesthesia, and technology really helps us. You just see in this case, we use the ultrasound. If you look at the 3D reconstructions, you will understand how the vertebral, the process is rotated. I'll just stop. You just see the vertebral body is rotated by about 90 degrees towards the left. So we use the ultrasound. There is a way to how to assess the lumbar spine in scoliotic. So we used all those methodologies. Some of the methodologies we invented and innovated. We spent about 1 or 2 days. So this is the epidural space in that patient. This is one lamina. This is one lamina. This is the spinal cord, and that's the dura mater. In about 2 to 3 mm window, we could able to see it. So that 2 to 3 mm window, we will mark on the skin. Through the ultrasound, we marked everything. And then we introduce the needle based on the ultrasound guidance. Ultrasound provides us all these points. So that between that, we will introduce the needle exactly in those points and those trajectory. You just look at how the spinal needle enters into the skin. It is well away from the midline. So we will use a loss of resistance with air as we enter into the space. Once we get a loss of resistance, then we will know that we are in the epidural space. That is the epidural space. And then we will do a combined spinal epidural. Through that, we will first put a needle and give the drug into the intrathecal space. Later, we will remove it. So we did a combined spinal epidural in this scoliotic spine in an objective and precise manner, because there is no question of fluke or chance here. Even if you miss, you will enter into the other places. So this is the scoliotic spine. At the end of the procedure, we give a bit of dye to ensure our epidural catheter in the perfect congruency. This is the durogram through the epidural catheter. And then at the end of about 1 hour, the patient is sitting and then doing effectively the incentive spirometer. So these sort of an end point, that is at the end of 1 hour, patient can sit effectively and do an incentive spirometer so that our lung functions are preserved as she come into the OT. So that is the benefit of regional anesthesia. Even in a compromised scoliotic spine, we could able to do this procedure 100% objective in a precise manner. So that's about the regional anesthesia. Now we come to the vascular access, and the use of ultrasound for vascular access is an established procedure across the globe. So I'm not going to discuss about the merits of it. Let me explain to you some innovative steps that we have adapted in our college for certain clinical requirements. We all of us know we have two vascular access devices. One is the Venflon on one hand, that is a peripheral venous cannula. If you leave it, the other vascular access device we have is a central line. Peripheral venous cannula, we can keep it for 3 to 4 days, that is 72 to 96 hours is what is recommended. And then if you have a central line, these central lines were commonly carried in the ICU areas, because if you don't carry it properly, it can lead to catheter-related bloodstream infections. It can lead to an air embolism. So it has to be handled by a person who is technically sound in dealing with these devices. But you know very well, we have a significant subset of patients. But you know very well, we have a significant subset of patients where their vascular access requirement is more prolonged, like they require an antibiotic for 1 week, 10 days. We have to administer TPN. We have to give an IV fluid. From 1 week to 10 or 20 days, we don't have any vascular access device for that. We have either Venflon or the central line. Central line can be placed and carried only in the critical care areas. And every one of the CRRIs or the surgery PGs can able to encounter this problem because patient is not having an IV access. So what we left out with, we will be putting multiple IV lines into the patient, see in abnormal site, above the elbow, feet, and everywhere. Even in this particular case, we inserted a line in the external jugular vein, but it has extravasated, and patient has got a huge neck swelling and severe thrombophlebitis because we don't have a device which can serve us between 1 week to 4 weeks. That is known as an intermediate vascular access. So what is the ideal device for such a requirement is a PICC line, that is peripherally inserted central venous catheter. So what it is basically it enters into the cubital vein and the tip lies somewhere in the SPCRA junction. So it is about 70 to 80 centimeter length, but the cost is 7,000 to 8,000 rupees. And you know very well, our patient cannot offer even the primary treatment itself, how they will spend 8,000 rupees for a vascular access device. So this put us into a turmoil that how we can help out these patients. We thought we are using our conventional central line, which is about 20 centimeter length. The cost is about 400 to 500 rupees. Can we use the conventional central line as a PICC line? For that, we have to enter somewhere in the axilla because the length is very short. If we enter somewhere in the upper arm, then only the tip may lie somewhere in the subclavian vein. It can be used for such a longer duration. So we have innovated, we have put this under ultrasound guidance. We introduced the single human central venous catheter in the axilla, because if you go to closer to the axilla, the infection rate is higher. We tunneled and take the line at the middle of the arm. So this is known as a green stone of Dawson. If you do that, the infection rate is less. At the same time, these lines can be kept for about 2 to 4 weeks. So we did that. We started putting these lines. We call this as a mid-axillary line. So we scan the upper arm, and under the ultrasound guidance, we cannulate the axillary vein or the cephalic vein. And then we will place these conventional central line into these veins and keep it for about a week. And we kept it for almost 3 months in few patients where they wanted to administer a chemotherapy. So with 500 to 700 rupees, we can offer a line for 1 month to 3 months. So this is the needle entering into the cephalic vein and the guide wire is being passed. So without an ultrasound, we can't do this because in the upper arm, you cannot see any veins, you cannot palpate. Also, only through ultrasound, you can see it. So these are all there. Then actually these descriptions, these inventions have created a lot of interest in the international community. So that is about the vascular access. And from 2011 to 2010, we have done almost 700 lines. So it has become an established practice in our institute, serving so many patients and reducing the patient suffering. So coming to the third zone, the acute pain service.
Shiva,
Similarly, the acute,
can I,
yeah.
1 second? Shiva, I hope
Yeah.
you're pacing yourself. We are actually near 3:40 time limit.
Okay, right, fine.
We have another 10 minutes or so. So if you
Okay,
want to
fine,
leave
fine.
some time for the question answer. Thank you.
Discussions, yes. Okay, fine. Thank you very much. So now, even if you see this picture, you will see that people are having a lot of wounds, and these patients have to be done dressing frequently. If you wanted to take them to the OT every now and then, it is really difficult. So what we did is we put a sciatic nerve catheters in these patients and then leave them in the ward. See, the sister will administer that. This is the sciatic nerve, and then we will place and create the space and inject the drug and place the catheter there. And then in the ward, you can do the dressing without any pain-free. So like that, we were doing a pain-free wound dressings in the ward. These sciatic nerve catheters can be kept for 10 to 20 days so that the wound healing will be better. Every time they will administer and do the dressing. Similarly, in rehabilitation, we have a lot of things to do. I will just skip that and go to the crisis. So far you have seen how the ultrasound has helped us in an elective situation where we know this is what we are going to do. But in crisis, here the problems in the OT, how the ultrasound helps us to overcome that situation. The first crisis is she is a 40-year-old female who was admitted for secondary infertility. She was going a diagnostic hysteroscopic evaluation under spinal anesthesia. During the procedure, that is, the surgeon is going to put a scope into the uterus, and then through the saline irrigation, he will inspect the uterus. In the middle of the procedure, suddenly patient developed bradycardia, uprolling of eyes, and then she sustained asystole. She is an ASA1 lady without no comorbidities, under spinal, suddenly patient sustained cardiac arrest. We don't know why. We have been called, we went in, the anesthetist was doing a CPR, IV line is flowing. We have no clue about, is there any drug administered? Is it an anaphylaxis? No such event. Then we don't know why the heart stopped. She's an young female. We had a transesophageal echocardiography that time. It is a portable machine. So we just took it and then put the ultrasound probe into to see what happens in the heart. Why it has stopped? This is what we saw. The entire chamber is filled with air. These speckles, the white dots are left atrium. This is filled with completely air. This is the right atrium. Massive air embolism. So we saw the IV line, it was flowing very well. There is no chance of air is entering into that. We don't know from where it is entering. Then we put a central line and aspirated as much as possible. We couldn't. Finally, we opened the chest, did a cardiac massage. We couldn't able to get the patient out. Patient expired. But we later, when we analysis, we come to know it is true. Air has been gone into the uterine vasculature, get absorbed into the system and produce a massive air embolism. So the second case is a hydatid cyst excision. Uneven full hydatid cyst excision, it is excised in toto. Surgery went uneven full. They are doing a peritoneal wash, about to close. I went out. After some time, resident came running and said that heart rate is 150 BP, 50-30. We don't know why. When I came inside, there is no bleeding, nothing. Everything is clean. Why there is such a tachycardia? We put in the probe, and this is what we saw in the TE. This is the ventricle, which is almost empty. This is a kissing papillary muscle. The volume is not there, and there is no bleeding anywhere. We are just pushing on one side 1 liter of crystalloid. The heart is just bulging. Once it is filled up, and after some time, again, it is getting empty. I don't know where this volume is lost. Patient is not bleeding, obviously, any external source. Then when we looked at the peritoneal cavity, the entire bowel is red in color, fiery red. Then we were asked what has happened. They used the citrimide as a polycidal agent to wash the peritoneal cavity, and patient went into severe splanchnic circulation, opened up. It's like an anaphylactoid reaction. So then we started around adrenaline and then managed these patients that come out. So these are all the cardiac complications. Similarly, in one patient, after an intubation, patient has started slowly developed desaturating. We don't know why. We did a fiber optic bronchoscope. Nothing we could able to pick at. There is minimal reduced air. An ultrasound, we just found like this. This is the lung which is completely collapsed, and this is the fluid on top of it. So when we just did a ICD, the patient was pouring pus. It's a massive pyothorax. After induction, the lung is completely collapsed and patient become hypoxic. So like this, the list is very big, and then it is keep going. So it is not just restricted to that. In every single application, we can use an ultrasound. So this is at the department level, how we have changed. Right now, we have 2 ultrasound machines. One is about 50 to 60 lakhs worth. Even the radiology department doesn't have. We have an exclusive pain clinic, acute pain service. We have 1 patent, copyrights, and publications. Okay, how it has changed the practice at the institute level? We have an exclusive ultrasound program for 1 year for capacity building. We included this in the PG curriculum, and we are training the AHS student as well. And in the society, we have conducted many workshops to train people, and we have developed curriculum for fellowship course across India, and we are editorial members. So all these things I have to end with an acknowledgement, because all these things started with one person, Professor M. Ravishankar, because in 2008 he said, that time we know ultrasound is a 1 10-mark question in paper 4 in the recent advances, as Kotur sir said. We read only for that. So that time he said, there is a point of care ultrasound workshop is there in Chennai. Why don't you go and attend? Because I'm not going to go there. You people have to take up this and develop. The true leader can able to see things far ahead of their time. And he saw that and he put us into that track. And this is where we are today. So to conclude, these are all doyens in the regional anesthesia. They served the facility for about 3 centuries. They don't have any gadgets, but they phenomenally worked well to develop the specialty. We are all basically serving our time. It's not the technology that produces the outcome. The technology itself is born out of passionate and committed human minds. These minds served their time phenomenally well. With all these gadgets, are we serving? Is the question I wanted to put forth to each one of us, so that you can imbibe this technology and we can serve our time better. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you, Shiva.
So
Nice talk.
Yeah.
You kind of walked us through for the last 1 decade or so of what you've been trying to do with ultrasound. Can we stop sharing so that we can start the questions?
I am just stop there.
Yeah. There was this. Can we ask Dr. Shivani Paggi to mute herself, please? Yeah, thank you. Actually, when we were hearing this, then initially when we thought about this topic also, how actually technology can help us to improve quality and safety in patient care. I was just reminded of our Don Berwick. He's the father of quality in patient care, quality in healthcare. He was with the US healthcare system for a very long time. And he has given so many criteria, at least the 6 different criteria, to say that the patient care is satisfying, there is quality assurance in that. But first and foremost, he says about patient safety. You have told us like how you can actually improve the safety of patient care by actually decreasing the amount of drugs, increasing the safety of the thing.
Yeah,
so that was
precision.
very nice. Also, you showed us how effective this can be because, and also the efficiency, reducing the drug, decreasing the side effects, but improving the access and improving the specific nerve blocks. So that was there. And I think we skipped that video on that patient-centeredness in the entire approach. You tried to show it in your rehabilitation. And most importantly, I think this point of care ultrasound, if not only in the OT, but in other areas like what you showed in your crisis management, are really helpful for timely interventions, where you can actually get involved. The outcomes of patients are directly dependent on from the time you make the critical diagnosis to when your interventions can start. So that time gap, if we actually reduce, we can actually improve outcomes. I think that way the talk actually walked us through all the aspects of quality assurance in patient care. I should thank you for that. And before we take up any questions, Dr. Kotur, would you like to comment anything so that we can proceed to this?
Yeah, what I like to thank you, Dr. Shiva, it was an explicit journey of yours of the last 1 decade. What I like to share is, you already said that the point of care ultrasound, of course, it has done a wonderful job for the progress of the specialty of anesthesia, but even other specialties, even physicians, pediatricians, everybody has been using this point of care ultrasound, and the evidence base for promoting or advocating point of care ultrasound as a supplement or improvement in the traditional method of either diagnosis or therapy, whatever it is slowly building. Not many these meta-analysis, etc., have come, and that has led to the inclusion of this point of care in various specialties in the curriculum itself. Like ultrasound guided nerve blocks, those are a part of the anesthesia curriculum. Like that, even the physicians, so many disease elements we is included, and the training is very important, as you rightly said, because whenever anybody is doing this point of care ultrasound, there's a lot of objectivity associated with that. It all depends upon the person who is doing that. If that he fails, then the whole thing will go wrong. That we have to always keep in mind. The person who wants to make use of this tool in his armamentarium, as and when required, you can use it, but you have to be very careful. So training is very important. That is all coming up. So I see some thoughts came to my mind. It was wonderful, excellent. Mahalakshmi, you are going
Thank
to
you,
disturb
sir.
Ravi Shankar or no?
Yes, sir, it's put up in
yeah.
the chat box. I'm expecting to hear use of ultrasound in point of care areas, emergency room, and yes, I mean, since the ultrasound has gone everywhere, critical care physician, they have their own stories to talk about. Their applications are wide and vast. Similarly, in the emergency room, EFAST, lung, cardiac ultrasound is their zone. And inside the operating room, these are all the things. I have so many things, but I thought if I put up like this, it exposes the anesthesia as a whole. If I take only the crisis management, it may not be the served thing. So I took the balance of both.
I have one question to ask you, Dr. Seshanmugam.
Yeah.
Like we really see that it is helpful. It is helpful in targeting the specific nerves and specific areas. It helps us to reduce. Is it really translated into measurable patient outcomes? Okay, apart from the pain relief, which is earlier, have we demonstrated that in any other way that this has improved the patient outcomes with regard to duration of stay or complications and others? So what does the literature say on this particular aspect? You are with me? Hello? 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 Hello?
His connection probably got disconnected.
Okay. He might have got disconnected. Dr. Shiva, are you here with us? I think he got
Sunday.
disconnected. Maybe.
His audio is not there. Audio connection.
No,
Answer for this question, madam. Actually, the study has been done with doing a blind technique and doing ultrasonography technique. They have proved
okay.
that this one is more success and less complicated. There's a lot of comparative studies there, madam.
Okay. Comparative studies in trying to find out the patient outcomes.
Application, outcome, and the complications, what are the things can happen. Everything there, then they say that this one is superior and better one, and patient accessibility also good, like that.
And any one of the audience, madam, can you hear me now?
Just now we heard, Dr. Elil Rajan was trying to answer for you. So maybe you can take that question if you want.
It has transformed a lot. Safety is, you have seen the complication rate has dramatically changed in terms of all the regional anesthesia, in terms of cost of care. Right now, below elbow, below knee, we are not admitting the patient. It is a daycare procedure, it has become. They will come to the OT, we will do the block, in 2 hours procedure will be over. By the afternoon, if there is no surgical indications, they will go home. So the cost has come down by 60 to 70%. And even the shoulder reduction, minor debridement, they are not coming to the OT at all because we are taking the machine and goes to the ward. These diabetic foods, otherwise they would have come to the OT 10 times. They would never ever come to the OT at all now. And then the vascular access cost is completely transformed. So we taking the machine to the ward area, we are giving the block there. Most of the blocks, the shoulder reduction done in the casualty itself. So the OT timings is cut off. The vascular access device cost has been cut off. The pain relief cost. So it is a huge turnaround time as well as. So the patient stay inside the hospital is drastically changed. So on every segment, it has changed in terms of safety, cost, turnaround time, quality, precision. So there is no evidence well established. These things are no more debatable as of now.
Okay. Thank you, Shiva. Maybe that is for our knowledge,
Thank you.
not
Yeah.
for yours.
Yes.
And
yes,
one more
yes.
question I have. See, now you were telling that I don't know. I remember the first Sonosite machine we bought for some 15, 16 lakhs. And now you say that it has gone up to 50, 60 lakhs. So actually this return of investment
Not a good.
depends on
Yes.
actually the
True.
volume what you are going to use. So how
Yeah.
long you think it will take for you to break even with this?
Yeah, now what the machine we have is a teaching training institute, and with the effort of our mentors, we could able to get. But as the usage has become wider and wider, the machine cost has come down a lot. Now we have a machine starting from 3 lakhs. And then all the hospitals now they have invested because it's become mandatory at the regulatory authority itself, so that the equipment has gone into the hospital and it has come down a lot. So when it has become 3 to 5 lakhs, and then you charge about 250 to 300 rupees for an ultrasound usage like a C-arm, it will easily you break away in about 1 to 2 years time. But when you look at the patient friendliness, the turnaround time, the cost cutting, it is very worthwhile. And most of the surgeons, it's not the anesthetists, the surgeons are buying the equipment because they have seen the benefit of it. Yeah. So that indicates they could able to recover the cost.
Yeah, because the bottom line many a times is the cost and
Yes.
the usage
Yes.
with
Yes.
cost.
Now it has become very cost effective.
And before we actually close, we are almost nearing time. I would like to ask one question that you have started this course, the fellowship in ultrasound guided anesthesia. Can you actually trace the evolution of the course from the time you have started to now?
Yeah.
Maybe it's more than
So
7, 8
now,
years.
Yeah, now we have started on 2013. Now it is 8 years. So because we have seen the need of it, because when we have started, when Ravi Shankar sir introduced it, there is nobody to train. So that is the reason why he told me to write to UK to find a place where you will get trained. So that is how I went to UK in 2010, because there is no place in India can provide us a structured training in these skill sets. So I spent about 6 months. When I come back, I can utilize those skills and develop myself. Then I need, because this is really in demand, it is going to be the future. That is with that thought in mind, once we evolve to certain stage, we will offer a first 6 months course. Then we wrote a curriculum, submitted to the university. Then we started 6 months. Then lot of demand and we couldn't able to serve that. Then from 6 months, we have increased to 1 year because it needs a lot of science and application. So right now it is a 1 year full-time fellowship course. There are 4 fellows are there after the MD degree with us exclusively to learn the skill set. And even 1 year is not enough now. As of now, the applications are becoming so much. The acute pain service, vascular access clinic, chronic pain intervention. So beyond the OT, the applications are numerous. Even if you look at the departmental statistics, every month outside the OR, we have 50 to 600 services. So it is equivalent to my inside OT case. OT case will be 400 to 500. Outside the OT case, I will have 600 to 700. Pain relief, blocks, central lines, and assessments. So, I mean, that's how it has gone. So this is how it has been evolved now.
Yeah. So for any of the postgraduates or young anesthetists in the audience who would like to get trained in ultrasound guided anesthesia, you can always contact Dr.
Yeah, you can
Shivashankar.
Google regional anesthesia fellowship. You will get the links and things.
Mahalakshmi, I just wanted to respond to your question of break-even point when you invest the money in the ultrasound. One thing we must remember is anesthesia is not a revenue generating this one, no, the overall. And so suppose I invest 1 lakh, 1 crore in anesthesia workstation, where is the money that is coming back? That kind of a thinking doesn't apply to specialty of anesthesia. This is what I'm telling, No, because this is a corporate thinking. And I think from the training point of view, when it is mandated by NMC or when by the regulating council, then that thinking process doesn't work. And how
coming to the regulatory, even the curriculum.
Of rupees in radiology, how many institutions? Yes. And how many institutions generated revenue of those are invested in radiology? The management gets the money by way of seats. It's a fact.
Yeah. Actually, those are for any service. Apple, when it started, the computers were so costly, it was beyond the reach of normal people. So if more and more anesthetists who are practicing
Use
and
it.
if more and more surgeons who run small hospitals need to invest on
It has come.
anesthesia in the ultrasound machine, the cost has to come down only, sir. So that was my
It has
intention of
changed,
asking
madam.
that
Yes,
question.
it has changed. As you said rightly, it has changed. Now all the clinics, they are investing and buying. They have seen the benefit of it.
Okay, last but not the least, it was very fascinating to see how your course has, you conceived the
Yeah.
course and you are running
Yeah.
it and you have evolved over a period of time. Well, how do you think that these lessons, how it can translate into other specialties? What is that we can learn from your experiences that can actually help other specialties to grow or diversify from their traditional
Yeah.
areas?
Yeah, true. Now, when the surgeons are seeing me doing all these peripheral nerve blocks, when they wanted to do the shoulder joint injection or hip joint injection, they will request me, Shiva, can you show me? We wanted to put a steroid into the shoulder joint. There's a musculoskeletal ultrasound itself is a specialty altogether. Now, after I am assisting them, now most of my orthopedic surgeons, they went into musculoskeletal ultrasound and they are by their own ultrasound machine and they are doing it. Even in the cath lab, when we went to a difficult vascular access, they are not able to puncture, they will immediately call us. Then we used to do a lot of rescue vascular punctures for them, even a complete thrombus vessel. After seeing it, now the cardiology department is using their own ultrasound machine for ultrasound guided vascular access. Even neonatal lines. So still now we are cannulating for all our pediatricians, the newborn babies, because we use ultrasound. So we are training them now. They are also wanted to buy an ultrasound and then do one vascular access. So, and we got it for the emergency medicine and critical care. They used to share our machine. Now they have bought their own for the last 5 years. So this is how wherever we go, when they see the transformation, how we are doing things in an objective manner, automatically they imbibe and they will use for their patient care services.
Yeah. Thank you, Shiva. Now we are in Corona times. I think we should use analogies similar to Corona, like how herd immunity can develop, no? Like when you inject people here, there,
Yes.
everywhere, and then it develops over a period of time. You are also actually
Yeah.
sensitizing the entire community and developing transformations in all those
Yeah.
areas. It was very nice listening to your talk and even
Thank
better
you.
in the discussion session. Like that is what I
Yeah.
would say. And if I have to go by the comments in the chat box, Dr. Vishnu Bhatt has told a very interesting talk. And I think Sarjeet is our anesthesia PG. Arjun is also our anesthesia PG. They all have thanked you for the very informative
Okay.
session.
Thank you.
You very much for this
Thank you very
session.
much, ma'am. Thank
Yeah.
you.
And before we close,
you.
we have some announcements for the participants. One is next Friday, we will not be having the FFF webinar, but we have a very much awaited program that is on next Thursday evening, 4:30. You remember that our 50th episode, Professor Gordon Kayat from the McMaster's University, Canada, spoke to us about evidence-based medicine. So that session had more than 650 participants and a lot of questions were generated both during the session and before the session. And we could scarcely take up 5 or 6 questions for discussion. So we have actually fixed up an exclusive question and answer session with Dr. Gordon Gayat. That would be next Thursday, that is on 1st. Please note the change in timing. Instead of Friday, we will be meeting next Thursday evening 4:30 to 6:30, wherein all the questions which you had put. So we will try and take it up with Professor Gayat and hopefully you will get your money's worth out of it. Anyway, this program doesn't charge anything, just for the word of speech. Okay. So that is the announcement from our desk. We'll again meet you on next Thursday, 4:30 p.m. Okay. With this, we will close this today's program. On behalf of the Scientific Society of AVMC and VMRF, I would like to thank Dr. Shiva Shanmugam, who gave this very interesting presentation. And I thank all the participants for their enthusiastic presence and participation. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.